In South Africa, if you've got money, then at least you've got justice. Justice is money.
Should the state and the police make sure that their case is watertight? And how do they do that?
It goes without saying that the start of any case is wholly dependent on good evidence that has been properly obtained and secured and should be in a position to be led properly before a magistrate or a presiding officer.
I think you can win a case without evidence only if you've got money, because in South Africa, money talks.
The first detectives to arrive on the scene walked all over the place, then with no regard for safeguarding this area.
Once a crime scene is compromised, the evidence that is extracted from that crime scene is the fruit of a poison tree.
That's Rights and Recourse, Sundays 2 p.m. on SABC News.
This is Newsroom. Hello and welcome from Johannesburg in South Africa. I'm Sam Marshall. This show is live and broadcast from our studios in Auckland Park. We're also streaming live on YouTube with the entire show available on our YouTube channel. Today we focus on the parliamentary debate on xenophobic attacks. We also speak to the NFP Secretary General about xenophobia, and we find out more about World Haemophilia Day. But first, let's get a sense of what the day's news is with Anita Mal.
Good morning, I'm Manindo Mal. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. Home Affairs Minister Malusi Gigaba is determined the government will get to the root cause of the current spate of xenophobic attacks. Speaking to Morning Live earlier, Gigaba said the purpose of the attacks seemed to be political.
From where we stand as government, we don't think that this is just sporadic outbreak of violence. It is orchestrated, it's organized, somebody is fueling this, and the purposes seem to stretch beyond just an anti-African immigrants sentiments in South Africa. The purposes seem also to be very political, to destabilize the country.
Tensions flared in Jeppestown and Cleveland overnight. Police say 12 people have been arrested in connection with xenophobic attacks in the two areas. Several cars were set alight and a number of shops were looted and vandalized in Johannesburg CBD. Meanwhile, President Jacob Zuma says the violent attacks on foreign nationals go against all of South Africa's values. The president addressed the National Assembly yesterday before the start of the Q&A session. President Zuma has also appealed to users of social media to play a positive role in nation building instead of instigating violence.
We condemn the violence in the strongest possible terms. The attacks violate all the values that South Africa embodies, especially the respect for human life, human rights, human dignity, and Ubuntu.
African diplomats will today be addressed on government's efforts to end xenophobic attacks in South Africa. International Relations Minister Maite Nkwana Mashabane will address diplomats in Pretoria. At least 5 people have been killed in the violence which started in Durban 2 weeks ago. The attacks have spread to a number of areas including Pietermaritzburg, the East Rand and Johannesburg. African Union Commission Chairperson Nkosazana Dlamini Zuma has slammed the incidents as unacceptable. And convicted rapist Bob Hewitt is expected to know his fate today. This is the former Grand Slam tennis champion is expected to be sentenced in the High Court in Pretoria. Hewitt was found guilty of raping 2 girls he gave tennis lessons to in the 1980s. He was also found guilty of sexually assaulting another. He had pleaded not guilty to the charges against him. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, over to you.
Thanks, Anina. Let's start with one of the stories you touched on in your headlines. International Relations Minister Maite will today address African diplomats in Pretoria on government's efforts to end xenophobic attacks. At least 5 people have been killed in the recent spate of violence, which started in Durban 2 weeks ago. It has spread to a number of areas, including Pietermaritzburg, Johannesburg and Gauteng's East Rand. President Jacob Zuma says the unrest goes against South Africa's values.
The president strongly condemned the violent attacks and appealed for its immediate end. He reminded the culprits that anti-apartheid activists found safe havens beyond our borders.
Many South Africans left this country at some point and lived in other countries in the continent and beyond. We were treated with generosity, dignity, and respect by our brothers and sisters from the rest of the continent. We will never forget that hospitality and solidarity, the support of the frontline states in Southern Africa, and that of the Organization for African Unity was critical to the achievement of the freedom and democracy we are enjoying today.
Zuma reiterated government support for displaced foreigners and implored communities to protect them against violence. Lukhanyo Khalada, SABC News, Parliament.
We're now joined by SABC Parliamentary reporter Lukhanyo Khalada, who's followed the debate closely and joins us from our Parliamentary studios in Cape Town. Lukhanyo, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on Newsroom. And I think there's been so much reaction to the Q&A session that started very first with the President addressing the xenophobia incidences across the country. Just your assessment hours after that and how people are responding to the President this morning.
Sam, good morning. Yes, yesterday I thought was quite a critical debate. Remember, it wasn't necessarily on Parliament's program in the lead up to yesterday's sitting. But then on Wednesday, I think the presidency, as well as some smaller opposition parties, I think it was the UDM, wrote to the Speaker requesting this snap debate on the violent attacks on foreign nationals that have been taking place around the country over the past 2 weeks. Excuse me. And so obviously yesterday the sitting started with that debate. And the President obviously spoke, very heartfelt words about how South African leaders, to a very large extent, had all gone into exile into other African countries. And as we just heard in the clip that you guys played, they were received very warmly. And countries like Zambia, for instance, the ANC had headquarters there. So it is quite sad today to hear Zambia saying that, it's packing up and it's ready to come and fetch its foreign nationals that live in South Africa. The response has been quite overwhelming. Last night I had an interview with the DA's leader in Parliament, Mmusi Maimane, and he was basically saying that, he was encouraged by what the President had said. But, now what he was saying was that we must move beyond the words, because the words have now been spoken. This has been condemned, but now it must move into the second phase where we start seeing the action, where we start seeing the leaders visiting the affected areas and talking to the affected communities directly, as in face to face. Sam?
Lukhanyo, is that sentiment shared with other political parties that you engaged after the Q&A session? We've heard the President talk about it. This morning we heard the Home Affairs Minister Malusi Gigaba maybe add a new spin to this conversation, saying that, look, it seems to be that there is an underlining theme, that there is a organized. He didn't call it a third force, but there is something pushing an agenda. That there's something more than just there's more than just these sporadic attacks. That we need to investigate what some of the other issues are. What are some of the political parties saying? Because that's something new we heard this morning.
Sam, in the debate yesterday, the leader of the United Democratic Movement, Ubantu Olomisa, said in Xhosa that they were ready to hold hands and go with the president as he goes about visiting these affected areas. And I think that was the sentiment that came from other political parties as well, basically saying that we've now said what we've needed to say in Parliament. Now we must actually go down into the ground, go and meet with the people, talk to the people, and try to find out what the real issues are. The statements that were made by the Home Affairs Minister, Malusi Gigaba, Sam, I'm sure you would agree with me that if, for instance, they suspect that there's more to these attacks, that there is a hand somewhere behind that's directing it. I think that the sentiment of the political parties, where they're all saying that let's go there, let's meet with the people, let's find out what the real issues are. I think if the parties do actually carry that out and go and meet with the people, they will then get to the bottom of this. They will then get to find out firsthand, for instance, if there is a hand behind all of these attacks, or whether these attacks are because people have reached a point where they see that the foreign nationals are taking away their jobs, the foreign nationals are starting businesses in their areas, or what the true case may be in this regard. Sam?
The South African Human Rights Commission has blatantly called it xenophobic, but there seems to be a sense, and I think it's shared by many, that South Africa is cautiously not trying to use the word xenophobia and maybe labeling it acts of criminality. Maybe we're talking about Afrophobia, but we're being very cautious around the word xenophobia. Did you get that sense yesterday too?
Sam, I think this is a government's line. On Wednesday, there was a briefing by the Justice Crime Protection Cluster. And basically, it was the ministers of police, the minister of defense, as well as the minister of state security. And, in that press briefing, we were engaging them. And that question came up where basically we were saying, look, the government is quite afraid to call this xenophobia. Are you calling it Afrophobia? And the minister, I think it was the minister of police, Nkosinathi Nhleko, who literally kind of tippy-toed around the subject, saying that it's not yet xenophobia. It looks like it could be Afrophobia, but at the moment, they're classifying it as just a criminal attacks on foreign nationals. I think government is afraid to outrightly call it xenophobia, obviously because of the implications of that, not just for internally for what that means internally for South Africa, but also what that means externally, and how the world will then respond once South Africa concedes and calls these attacks xenophobic attacks. I think they're being very careful. They're trying to manage the country's reputation at the same time as they're trying to quell these attacks that obviously have left quite a bitter taste in the mouth, not just for South Africans, but also for the rest of the continent, and to a very large extent the rest of the world that are looking at what's taking place in the country over the last 2 weeks. Sam?
Look, before we talk about the president announcing that the army would be deployed to the borders, let's quickly take a look at an interview that was done here on Morning Live when the Home Minister visited, the Home Affairs Minister, that is, Malusi Gigaba, visited Morning Live this morning, and we talked about the damage caused by the violence and how that affects our reputation internationally. Take a look at this.
Who really do not seem to understand the full implications of what is going on in South Africa and the risks we are imposing on South Africans living abroad, particularly on the African continent. You've got South African soccer teams that are going to play elsewhere on the continent. You've got South Africans that are working or investing in other African countries. We are putting them at risk with irresponsible statements which seem to condone the violence.
In actual fact, that's a conversation with the Home Affairs Minister at SABC News, but he also was this morning in studio Morning Live. Just a reaction very quickly. We talked about migration and border controls, and it was been labelled as being at the heart of the problem. Did that come out in Parliament yesterday?
Not as much, Sam, but the President did obviously allude to it in his address and in his speech. But I don't think that it came out as strongly as I think both you and I would probably have liked it to. I think there was more a focus on what the foreign nationals do when they're inside the Republic, and not much about how they actually come into the Republic. The President spoke and saying that, look, they're going to obviously to send out the South African National Defence Force to try and shore up our borders, to try and make sure that the immigration officers at our borders are beefed up, that there's more personnel, that there's more capacity to try to root out who is allowed into the country and who not. But it didn't come out as strongly, even from the opposition parties, the issue of our borders. And I'm sure it's something that we're likely to see being discussed a lot more going forward. But just because it wasn't raised yesterday doesn't necessarily mean that it won't be raised as this matter gets continuous attention in Parliament. Sam?
I'm going to ask you a final question. We've run out of time, but I just want you to quickly wrap this up for us very quickly. We heard Malusi Gigaba talk about the relations of South Africans in other countries on the African continent. We have even on Facebook seen threats made by militant groups to South Africans living in other countries on the African continent. We have our own soccer team traveling on the African continent. Is there a sense of fear that maybe there could be retaliatory attacks on South Africans? Do you get the sense from whether it's government or other political parties that think that that might happen? Can you?
Sam, yes. Definitely. Like I said, I spoke to Mmusi Maimane, the leader of the Democratic Alliance in Parliament yesterday, and he was quite adamant that what is happening right now is obviously the repercussions of it will be that South Africans that are in other parts of the African continent will, they will experience acts of retaliation against them. Because, for instance, if you're in Senegal and a Senegalese person that lives in South Africa is harmed and that message gets home, a South African business, a South African working in Senegal will more than likely be victimized as a form of retaliation to say, what are you guys doing there to our brothers and sisters? So there's that real risk that South Africans that are living in other parts of the continent could be seriously in danger because of what's happening and what's being done by a very, very small pocket of South Africans. Sam?
Okay, Nicolata, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us. That's the SABC parliamentary reporter reacting to President Zuma's address in Parliament yesterday. Of course, ahead of the Q&A session that started on August the 21st, the President did take the time to address the xenophobic issues. Now, meanwhile, attacks on foreign nationals seem to be spreading. A number of shops were looted and vandalized in the Johannesburg CBD last night. Several cars are also reported to have been set alight in Jeppystown. Police are monitoring the situation. Immigrants residing in informal settlements in Germiston on Gauteng's East Rand have meanwhile spent the night in a local community hall. They fled their homes after threats of violence. Let's take a look at your tweets. Please remember to send your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. And let's start with HD Razo, who says, okay, we want President Zuma to step in, right? Okay, when he steps in, what must he do? Say, stop this and leave. What's the plan? He's asking some serious questions. HD Razo. One from Lesejo Semenya says, Zuma should be right there in the streets where it's happening, not debating it in Parliament. and many people have some views on that. Kabusheni Mjojo says President Zuma needs to address the South African people and condemn #xenophobia in #South Africa, not just in Parliament but publicly, and include that king. We, in actual fact, have seen the president in more than one interview on different platforms talk about xenophobia, and of course he's been quite vocal about acts of criminality and hardship not being tolerated. Now, today's picture of the day comes from Harry Morlau with the caption #Benoni is the people from the hostel who are pushing all this #xenophobia attacks. And that's the picture that, of course, is coming on our viewer pick of the day. Let's now take a look at the front pages from around the globe. In Europe, The Times, Alison Saunders, the Director of Public Prosecutions, personally overruled senior lawyers to block a prosecution of the Labour peer, Lord Janner, on child abuse charges. Then moving to the United States, the US today, more than half of some 770,000 soldiers are pessimistic about their future in the military, and nearly as many are unhappy in their jobs, despite a 6-year, $287 million campaign to make troops more optimistic and resilient. And in China, the South China Morning Post will ban water-polluting paper mills, oil refineries, pesticide producers and other industrial plants by the end of next year as it moves to tackle severe contamination of water supply. Now, xenophobic attacks sweeping the province of KZN has divided South Africans. Security forces are continuing to patrol affected areas. The heightened security measures follow President Jacob Zuma's condemnation of the violence and a peace march which thousands of people attended in Durban. 5 people have been killed and many foreign nationals have fled their homes since the attacks started 2 weeks ago. The National Freedom Party General Secretary, Professor Nhlanhla Nkubisa, joins us from our parliamentary studio in Cape Town. Professor, thank you very much for joining us. Let's take a look. Before we even start this conversation, let's take a look at this clip. Okay. So we don't have a clip to play, Professor, but let's talk about that engagement. Yesterday, the president came out quite strongly about xenophobia. We have seen political parties react to this ahead of the Q&A session. Your reaction to what the president was saying and the violence that's been unfolding and spreading throughout the country, starting in KZN?
Thanks, my brother. The National Freedom Party wants to put it quite categorically that what is happening in our country now is bad, especially in KwaZulu-Natal. The xenophobic attacks that are taking place in Durban, Pietermaritzburg, other places, but not only within the KZN province, but in the country as a whole. It's quite an inhuman activity. It's quite un-African. And it's all against the spirit of Ubuntu. And we're calling for all our brothers and sisters in South Africa that they must desist from doing this. They must stop here and now. What they are doing is denting the image of the country. These are human beings. These foreign nationals are human beings. They are brothers and sisters. They've got families too. And what we have seen is very sad. We've seen them fleeing their families, fleeing their homes. We've seen them being hacked, being killed, and that is very bad. It must stop here and now. You know, African countries in particular assisted us, South Africans, during the apartheid era. We understand the frustrations that are there, that we don't have jobs. Our youth are loitering and wandering around the streets having qualifications. But we say, South Africans, in spite of all this, let us pause and say, these are our fellow brothers and sisters. Let's give them a chance. Let us not kill them. Let us not harass them. Let us not do whatever. Let us stay together. And of course, we're saying to the South African government as well, we need to do something. Of course, understandable so that this is not the duty of the government alone at this point in time. Everybody, the civil society, NGOs, and all of us need to come together and say we are rallying around the government. His Excellency the President, the head of state, spoke yesterday. His Majesty, the King of the Zulu nation, has spoken. And I must say again, the speech of the King was misconstrued. At no stage did His Majesty, the King of the Zulus, say that we have got to shambok them, we've got to kill them, we've got to beat them. He never said that.
Professor?
I think it's some kind of greed and criminality out there, and we need to stop it here and now.
Professor, we can debate at length at what the King said and what he inferred in his statement, but we are sitting at a situation now, especially where it started in KZN, it has now spread across the country. We saw looting of shops in Gauteng overnight. Why is there this perception by South Africans, and I'm unjustly going to take it to KZN, why are the locals in KZN of this belief that foreigners are to blame for their lack of jobs, for the lack of money in the country, and why is this perception been allowed to grow and it has not been addressed by leaders like yourself until now?
You know, when things happen, it just begins with one torch, and it spreads like wildfire. And in the course of events, you find that it is uncontrollable. And when the government keeps quiet for a long time, it runs out there unabatedly, and you find that you cannot control it. But we believe it's not a time now to blame one another. It's time to rally around everybody as a nation to say this thing must stop. Let us stop killing them. Let us stop harassing them. Let us stop beating them. Let us stop doing whatever we can do. We must understand that they are brothers and sisters. But it's high time that the government be more vocal, and all of us be more vocal to say we must stop it. The NFP wants to state it categorically that this is not good, it's bad, we've got to stop it. These are our brothers and sisters. They are here, they must give them a chance. And the government must ensure that the borders that we have are not porous. Jobs must be created, because there are frustrations out there. They must also know who is in the country illegally and what is done about it. Who is here on a work permit? Who is here on a temporal permit? You know, I mean, who is staying with who? Where are they? And all these things must come to the fore.
Professor, there are some other issues as well, and part of this conversation is not only your reaction to the xenophobic attacks, but there's been defections out of your party. Internally, the NFP is also battling defections. Talk to me about that very quickly, and how many of your members have decided to leave the NFP?
The first story I want to tell you about, my brother, is that the NFP is welcoming new members in droves. Just recently, the leadership went to Vryheid and welcomed a lot of members, about 400 of them or more, or 500 from the IFP and other parties as well. We've been welcoming people in Utugela coming from other parties, and more people are joining the NFP. In Pietermaritzburg recently, we welcomed about 1,000 people joining the NFP. We were told that at least about 20 members from our party joined the IFP and other parties, and I'm told that they were just cramped in a very small room. And of course, some of these members really are not known within the NFP, but when they are paraded before television and before the leaders of those parties, they are said to be the big fish, or so to say, whereas perhaps we don't know them. But I'm sure that also there's a tendency to pick up anybody around the street and say, these are the members of the NFP. Of course, another thing that you've got to understand, certain individuals out there who are disgruntled at this point in time, as we go towards the local government election, some individuals will leapfrog and go to other parties with an aim of getting some positions or getting onto the list of some sort. But, you know, the NFP is very strong and is moving gallantly forward. We are forging ahead, going to all the provinces, ensuring that we make a dent, we make inroads into various territories, and we ensure that we win the upcoming local government elections. And we're galvanizing our forces, mobilizing them, forging out to victory. The NFP is stronger than before.
Professor, we're going to leave it there. We've run out of time, but thank you very much for joining us. That, of course, is the National Freedom Party General Secretary, Professor Nhlanhla Kubisa, talking to us about his reaction to the President's address in Parliament yesterday around the issues of xenophobia and also touching on defections from the party ahead of the local elections. Okay, we take a break. You don't go anywhere.
Yo ladies, newsflash! Did you know that in every South African election over the past 20 years, women have outnumbered men in voting? How cool is that? Big up ladies, you rock. So get registered and keep the girl power going.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom on SABC News. Let's just have a look at the stories making headlines today. Government is determined to get to the root cause of the current wave of xenophobic attacks that have swept across parts of the country. Speaking to Morning Live earlier, Home Affairs Minister Malusi Gigaba said the purpose of the attacks seemed to be political. Tensions flared in Jeppe's Town in Cleveland overnight. Police say 12 people have been arrested in connection with xenophobic attacks in the two areas. Several cars were set alight and a number of shops were looted and vandalized in Johannesburg CBD. And African diplomats will today be addressed on government's efforts to end xenophobic attacks in South Africa. International Relations Minister Mashabane will address diplomats in Pretoria. At least 5 people have been killed in the violence which started in Durban 2 weeks ago. Remember, you can find all of those stories on our Newsroom Facebook page. Just search for Newsroom. You can also follow us on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Sam, back to you.
Thanks, Anine. Now, the University of Free State has taken a lead ahead of everybody on the hotly contested issue on signs, symbols and statues. Students at the university have also pledged their support for the No to Racism and Yes to the Equality campaign. Various stakeholders from the university and the Mangaung Metro had discussions over cultural restitution and social justice interests, among other varied topics. Debates on university transformation were sparked by the Roads Must Fall campaign at the University of Cape Town. Deputy Director of the Institute of Reconciliation and Social Justice at the university, JC van der Merwe, joins us from Bloemfontein to give us light on their interactions. JC, good morning and thank you very much for joining us here on Newsroom. Let's get into what the highlights of the deliberations were.
Good morning. We set out the No to Racism campaign in March in celebrating Human Rights Month, and little did we know how the higher education landscape will change with the Roads Must Fall movement that followed. So we started out with conversations about racism and all other forms of unfair discrimination, and then in April, with celebrating 21 years of democracy, decided to follow it up with a Yes to Equality campaign, including all the other institutional values enshrined in our constitution. So there has been a series of discussions, formal, informal, and I think that is for us the most important aspect of this campaign, is that we engage in different formats with different stakeholders on the issues that is real for us. So it's not just limited to racism, No to Racism and Yes to Equality, but the broader picture in terms of what it means to be a South African citizen. And one of the highlights was when we had a pledge ceremony. On Monday, we pledged on the Bloemfontein campus, on Wednesday on the Kwakwa campus, and today we're pledging on the South campus, where we as a university community come together and then literally with our thumbprint on a canvas say, but we commit ourselves to the eradication of racism and all other forms of unfair discrimination, and we commit ourselves to equality. And that has been one of the highlights, to say in '94 we as a nation drew a line and say we as a country are going to do things differently from now on, radically differently.
JC?
And the community just anew drew that line at the University of the Free State.
JC, I can only imagine when you're having an open conversation with different stakeholders, people from different race groups, from different sectors of our community, that the conversation had to be candid. One of the things that kept on coming up was C.R. Swart. How did what is currently happening in the country, not issues only around xenophobia, but issues around statues, how did that filter into the conversation?
To a much extent, some of the conversations that we facilitated focused just on the statues. And I think that it is an important time in the history of higher education in South Africa, and we see ourselves as the University of the Free State in solidarity with all other higher education institutions. So that discussion is ongoing on our campus. There's within student communities, within the broader sector, and that's why we partnered with the Mangaung Metro, because it's not just statues on university spaces that needs to be relooked. We have to look at the historical context, we have to look at the legal implications in terms of the Heritage Act, and we have to ask ourselves, if we say no to racism and all the other unfair discriminations forms thereof, and if we say yes to equality, what does the statues stand for? And that's how we framed the conversation at our university. And let's take C.R. Swart as an example, to say that if we walk past that statue, where it is now in front of the law faculty, is it saying, can we look at it and say, this is saying yes to equality? This is saying yes to democracy.
Let's quickly touch on that point, JC, as well. I'm sorry to interject there, but we are running out of time. Just very, very quickly, in 15 seconds, we also think back when we think of the university. We remember the rates incidents that tarnished the image. Just moving from there, what's the current situation at the university, and how has the university been able to turn that horrible incident around? Very quickly.
I think it is a combination of strong leadership. I think it's a combination of opening up the conversations, the interaction between staff and students, and I think a real commitment from everybody in terms of the academic project and the human project. And that was our vision for the last 5-6 years, and this is what we're taking forward, to say that we're not just here in terms of academic excellence, but as important is the human project, which comes down to what does it mean to be an active citizen in this country.
JC, we're going to leave it there. Thank you very much. So much we can talk about, so very little time. That, of course, is the Deputy Director of the Institute of Reconciliation and Social Justice at the university, JC van der Merwe, joining us from Bloemfontein, the University of Free State, that is. Let's just take a look at your tweets. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter. It's at SABC Newsroom, and let's take a look at those tweets. This comes from Mosoto Queen, who says, hashtag Jeppystown was hectic. That was last night. We know overnight flare-ups in that part of Gauteng. Wayne Bowers says, with running battles between police and rioters in Jeppe and Cleveland, it was a dark night for South Africa. Hashtag no to xenophobia. Ryan Cummings says, while we mull over reactive repos to hashtag xenophobic attacks in hashtag Jeppystown and Benoni, etc., what proactive steps undertaken to stop the spread? And we take a look, of course, at some of those interesting pictures coming from Mzilikazi, who says, we have no shame for real. Hashtag xenophobia attacks. Hashtag Jepistan. Some more pictures of a car overturned, burnt out. That's from Ayanda Dladla, who says, Haibo Kwetu. And some interesting pictures there as well. Now, today's tweet of the day comes from Lindukutle Kumalo, who says, instead of working together to better Africa, we're killing each other. How is that going to help us move forward as Africa? And she poses that question, and let's maybe ponder on that and respond to that as well. Okay, it's time for another break here on Newsroom. Don't go anywhere.
Information-hungry viewers stay with SABC News, as issues on the West are different from issues on the East or here in Johannesburg. So it is not surprising that people who follow the news know that there are two things for sure: that anything can happen, and SABC News will tell you when it does. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
Welcome back. You're watching Newsroom. Thank you for choosing to stay with us. Now, today is World Haemophilia Day. Across the world, the day is used to create awareness around and to increase support for those living with this inherited bleeding disorder. Joining us to tell us more about haemophilia is clinical hematologist Professor Johnny Mutlangu and Pastor Alfred Monametsi, who lives with the disease. Gentlemen, thank you very much for joining me. Professor, let's start with you. We're talking about a bleeding disorder, but what does that actually mean to the layman industry?
What it means is that someone is born with a deficiency of one of the proteins that we need to stop bleeding. And as a result of that deficiency, they have a tendency to bleed, and often they bleed spontaneously, in other words, without injury. So haemophilia is a condition where one of the clotting factors is missing, and hence it's a bleeding disorder.
Professor, you work at the Charlotte Maxeke Johannesburg Academic Hospital. Just how many of these cases do you come across, and how prevalent is it in South Africa?
The prevalence in South Africa is the same as in any other part of the world. Haemophilia occurs 1 in 10,000 males who are born, and in the case of haemophilia B, it's 1 in 25,000. We have in our clinic at the moment just over 500 patients born with haemophilia that we are managing.
Wow. I can only imagine that there must be stigmas attached to people that suffer from this disease, and not only educating the people that have the disease, but those living around them. But some of the stigmas are, and it's shocking to read that people that suffer from haemophilia are HIV positive, gay, you can't touch them, or they'll bruise easily. Can we use this platform to dispel some of these stigmas and these myths?
Certainly, I think that is perhaps one of the primary reasons we are here, is to educate the public that haemophilia, in the past, it used to be a condition where the sufferer does not see their 20th birthday. With the current awareness and the skills and the knowledge we have, people living with haemophilia actually can live a normal life. So all the myths associated with haemophilia in the past, in fact, I think of the past. In the past, patients with haemophilia were given blood products that were clearly infected with viruses. We don't actually do that anymore. All of our products that we use are all screened appropriately. And in fact, there is a certain set of products that we use that are not derived from human beings. So they are highly unlikely to have infectious agents. On the sort of other extreme, where haemophilia patients are being looked after properly, they will be able to contribute to society, they will be able to live good quality of life, and they certainly would be able to behave and act like any other citizen who is able to contribute to the economy of the country.
Pastor Monometse, let me bring you into this conversation. I mean, you've been diagnosed, I think, at the age of 10. What has it been like? What has your life been like living with haemophilia?
Yeah, as Prof said, it was a bit of a difficult session from those times because there was no proper understanding on this issue of haemophilia. But now late, since we have even haemophilia clinic in Johannesburg, life has been normal. It has been easy for us to live normally as it is expected for anyone to be. And the treatment that we are having, sometimes they even delivered at home so that we are trained so that we can also be able to attend to ourselves before following or going to stay for a long queue at the hospital or at the clinic. So we do have that. And then one thing that I like about the new developments around this issue of how to go about in terms of treating this haemophilia challenge is that we are also trained on a prophylaxis level, whereby when I say prophylaxis, I mean when you feel like my joint is not okay, I feel some irritation at that particular time, you get the factor by yourself, and then you inject yourself. After some few hours, you are okay.
You've lost people close to you to this disease, and some of the stats are saying over 50% of respondents are careful about informing others about the condition. Why do you think that is the case?
Yeah, the issue of I lost 10 of my brothers who died of haemophilia. I would say it was because of lack of knowledge. And I would say also it was because of lack of products, relevant products that they were supposed to get. Like, for instance, I'm a factor 9, severe factor 9 hemophilia patient with inhibitors. So most of the things other patients might be factor 8, others might be factor 9. But the researches that have been done by the people like Professor Mahlangu here helped us a lot to be relevant to the treatment that we are getting, and we live the normal life as it pleases anyone.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. I want to ask one final question. I know I'm being wrapped, but how are we joining the world effort? How are we looking at today and coming together?
We are part of the global haemophilia community, and the theme for this year is lending support to the family of people with haemophilia. So the way we are doing it is raise awareness like we're doing now, but most importantly, there are a large number of events around the country, some of which are showing strength to the people with haemophilia, some of which are clearly educational, etc. Yeah.
Professor, we're going to leave it there. We are running out of time. I'm taking too much time. John Mahlangu joining us, and Pastor Alfred Monometse, who lives with haemophilia. Today is World Haemophilia Day. Okay, let's have a look at what people are saying on Twitter. Please remember to send us your views on Twitter at SABC Newsroom. Let's move to our bright eye very, very quickly. It says from Devon Grant Hayes, it says the crowd before we left, before my battery died. And that is, of course, from Devon Grant. Let's also take a look at some pictures from Shaka Sisulu. It says the local artist showed up to say hashtag stop xenophobia, we are Africa, hashtag Durban March. Some other interesting pictures as well, and this is all ahead of the march yesterday from Curry's Fountain. Sanela Ntokoza says hashtag Durban March and Africa Unite, and this is really exactly what we want to see people to do, of course, is join that march and strongly condemn the acts of violence that we've seen spreading across the country. Okay, now, as you know, every week we, on a Friday, do something light and interesting. And this week, it's no different. We're talking to Sean Hayes from the band Motherland. Sean, thank you very much for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
This natural sound, I almost feel like music is going back to its organic roots and people are connecting with real music again.
Yeah, well, we're a South African band and we're very passionate about Africa. So we decided to name our band the Motherland. And it's just so cool to be rooted and South African and, showing the love to every single African. So it's actually quite exciting.
What do you sing about?
We mostly sing about whatever's really on my mind, I guess. I'm the songwriter.
Okay.
But, we all put our input in and we all kind of sing about, experiences and being South African and just everyday life experiences, I guess.
Very quickly, reaction from you. We saw some big name artists yesterday join the march in Durban. Your reaction to what's been happening in the country?
Yeah, it's been crazy. We're actually going to be playing a show soon on the 26th or 27th, and that's going to be to raise money for Xenophobia. So we are getting involved, but it's really depressing. It's hectic.
Anybody want to follow you? Where can they go? Where's the upcoming gigs?
Yeah, we're playing at the Common Room tomorrow. There's a big market happening at the Common Room. We're playing there. We're playing at the Coffee and Chocolate Expo in Durban now from the 1st to the 3rd of May at the Suncoast Casino. They can check us out on Twitter at the Motherland SA or on Facebook at Motherland Band.
Sean Hayes, we're going to leave it there, but thank you very much for joining us. That, of course, is Newsroom, and that's how we come to the end of our program today. We broadcast live from our studios in Auckland Park, Johannesburg, every weekday morning between 9 and 10 a.m. We also stream live on YouTube at that time, with the show available on demand on our YouTube channel. We love to interact and enjoy your contributions and opinions. This is SABC Newsroom. We play out with Motherland.
To dying in the yard, mommy's sipping champagne in the bar. It's such a shame. Cindy's out late at night. She's young now, only 16 years. So flippin' sad. Sparse burned out. Sparse burned out, you know. I've been so alone. Sparse burned out. Sparse burned out, you know. I've been so alone. Yeah, I've been so alone. Alone, no. Alone, I've been so alone. Alone, no. Alone, I've been so alone. Sparse burned out. Sparse burned out, no. I've been so alone. Sparse burned out. Sparse burned out, no. I've been so alone. Yeah, I've been so alone.
Mourning is when different people take different directions to different places for different reasons to do different things. Streets come alive. Evening is when people go home to their loved ones and turn to South Africa's most watched and trusted evening news. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
Information-hungry viewers stay with SABC News, as issues on the West are different from issues on the East or here in Johannesburg. So it is not surprising that people who follow the news know that there are two things for sure: that anything can happen, and SABC News will tell you when it does. Because we keep the nation fully informed. We are SABC News.
Welcome to AM News here on SABC News Channel 404.
The people who also should be concerned are the people who voted for people of that ilk.
South Africa is indeed a unique country, and South Africa has a democracy that is very exceptional.
If people want to change the rules, do it properly, do it within the context of the Rules Committee within Parliament. And when you shout, it doesn't mean people are listening to you.
But there is a point of authority that must always prevail.
The ANC is very determined. We will not allow South Africa's parliament to be dragged down into the mud, and we will defend the constitution and parliament.
I think our country is really being torn to pieces. And I think that the struggle for liberation didn't take place for people to play the fool like this in our country.
That's AM News, daily at 10 a.m. on SABC News.